In a landmark decision that could reshape the landscape of American trade policy, a federal appeals court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs. These tariffs, which were imposed on a range of imported goods, have been a subject of intense debate since their inception, affecting industries, consumers, and international relations alike. The tariffs were a cornerstone of the America First economic policy, a signature initiative of the Trump administration. They were designed to protect American industries, particularly steel and aluminum, from what the administration described as unfair foreign competition. Supporters argued that these measures were necessary to revive domestic manufacturing and safeguard American jobs. However, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled that the tariffs exceeded the executive branch's authority. The court found that the administration had overstepped its legal bounds, raising important questions about the limits of presidential power in matters of trade and national security. This decision has sparked a vigorous debate about the balance of power between the president and Congress. Lawmakers are now grappling with whether Congress should reclaim more control over trade policy, or if the executive branch should retain broad authority to act swiftly in the name of national interest. Financial markets reacted swiftly to the news. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surged as investors anticipated a potential easing of trade tensions and lower costs for manufacturers reliant on imported materials. However, not all sectors benefited. Domestic steel and aluminum stocks fell sharply, reflecting concerns that these industries could face renewed competition from abroad without the protection of tariffs. The ruling directly challenges the trade wars initiated under President Trump, casting doubt on the national security justification that was used to impose the tariffs. Critics have long argued that these justifications were a pretext for economic protectionism, while supporters maintain they were necessary for national defense. With this decision, the stage is set for a potential Supreme Court battle. Legal experts predict that the case could ultimately be decided by the nation's highest court, which would have far-reaching implications for the future of presidential authority and the direction of U.S. trade policy. The decision effectively moves the tariff debate from the political arena of the White House to the impartial halls of the judiciary, where legal precedent and constitutional interpretation will play a decisive role. Uncertainty now looms over the Biden administration. Will the current administration choose to appeal the ruling, seeking to preserve some executive flexibility in trade matters? Or will it accept the court's decision and work with Congress to craft new trade legislation? Meanwhile, international partners are closely watching America's next move. Many countries retaliated against the tariffs with their own trade barriers, and the court's decision could open the door to renewed negotiations and improved diplomatic relations. For communities in America's industrial heartland, the court's decision forces a reckoning with the legacy of economic protectionism. Workers and business owners alike are left to wonder how the changing trade landscape will affect their livelihoods and the future of American manufacturing. As analysts and policymakers debate the next steps, one thing is clear: the implications of this ruling will continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months, shaping the national conversation on trade, economic security, and the proper limits of presidential power for years to come. The court's decision limits the president's power to impose tariffs under Section 232. The judges argued the law was meant for specific threats, not broad economic restructuring. The ruling rebukes the executive branch's expansive claims of power in trade. The court emphasized the original law was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It reaffirms Congress's constitutional role in regulating foreign commerce. The decision draws a line between economic protectionism and legitimate security concerns. It serves as a judicial check on the executive, reminding the White House of its limits. The ruling reasserts Congress's primacy in international commerce. The court's decision sent shockwaves through the American economy, instantly creating a new landscape of winners and losers across various industries. The ruling was not just a legal milestone, but a catalyst for immediate and far-reaching economic consequences. On Wall Street, investors scrambled to assess the impact, with some stocks soaring while others plummeted. The news sparked a flurry of activity as business leaders and workers alike tried to understand what the future might hold for their livelihoods. For industries that rely heavily on imported steel and aluminum, such as automakers, aerospace companies, and manufacturers of appliances, there was a sense of renewed optimism. These sectors have long struggled with higher costs due to tariffs, and the possibility of relief brought hope for increased competitiveness and profitability. The potential lifting of tariffs promises not only cost reductions, but also the chance to ramp up production, hire more workers, and expand operations. Companies that depend on global supply chains could see smoother operations and improved margins, making American-made products more attractive both at home and abroad. However, for domestic steel and aluminum producers, the ruling triggered deep concern. Without the protective shield of tariffs, these industries now face increased competition from cheaper imports, threatening jobs, profits, and even the survival of some plants. Workers and executives worry about layoffs, plant closures, and the erosion of a once dominant American industry. Meanwhile, American farmers who have been caught in the crossfire of retaliatory tariffs from trading partners felt a glimmer of hope. The agricultural sector has suffered from lost export markets and falling prices, but the court's decision could pave the way for renewed trade and economic recovery in rural communities. Farmers are now looking forward to the possibility of de-escalation in trade hostilities, the reopening of critical export markets, and the restoration of international partnerships that are vital for their survival. For everyday consumers, the ruling could translate into lower prices on a wide range of goods, from groceries and electronics to cars and home appliances. In effect, this acts as a small but meaningful tax cut, putting more money back into the pockets of American families and potentially boosting consumer spending. The decision has reignited the national debate over the trade-offs between protecting domestic producers and lowering costs for consumers. Economists, policymakers, and ordinary citizens are now grappling with the complex question of how best to balance these competing interests in a rapidly changing global economy. Ultimately, the court's ruling forces a comprehensive reevaluation of America's tariff policies and their broader impact on the economy. As government officials and industry leaders analyze the data and debate next steps, the nation stands at a crossroads with the future of American industry, agriculture, and consumer welfare hanging in the balance. When Donald Trump took office, he made it clear that his administration would pursue an America-first economic agenda, a sharp departure from previous decades of U.S. policy. At the heart of this approach were tariffs, taxes on imported goods, which became a signature tool of his presidency. Trump argued that these tariffs were necessary to protect American industries and workers from what he described as unfair foreign competition and decades of trade deals that, in his view, disadvantaged the United States. The agenda aimed to counteract the effects of globalization and a series of free trade agreements that, according to Trump, had led to the loss of American jobs and the decline of domestic manufacturing. By imposing tariffs, the administration sought to level the playing field and encourage companies to bring production back to the U.S. Tariffs were not just a punitive measure, they were a negotiating tactic. The Trump administration used them to pressure trading partners like China, Canada, and the European Union into renegotiating deals that would, in theory, be more favorable to American interests. This strategy was highly disruptive, bypassing the often slow and complex process of international negotiations in favor of direct unilateral action. While some praised the boldness of this approach, others warned it risked sparking trade wars and harming American consumers. The ultimate goal was to reset America's economic relationships around the world, putting national interests and American workers at the forefront of every decision. Supporters saw this as a long overdue correction, while critics feared it would isolate the U.S. from global markets. This approach marked a significant departure from the bipartisan consensus that had long supported free trade as a path to prosperity and global influence. By invoking Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the Trump administration was able to impose tariffs quickly, bypassing the need for lengthy congressional approval. This gave the executive branch unprecedented power over trade policy. However, this use of executive authority did not go unchallenged. Recent court rulings have questioned whether national security concerns truly justified such rapid and sweeping tariff actions, setting the stage for ongoing legal and political battles. The decision has cast doubt on the legitimacy of using national security as a blanket justification for major economic policy shifts, raising important questions about the balance of power and the future direction of American trade policy. Supporters see the court ruling as a blow to American workers. Tariffs were viewed as a corrective to failed trade policies and unfair practices. They were seen as a defense of the nation's industrial base and national security. Proponents credit tariffs with saving industries like steel and aluminum. The policy was a negotiating tactic that led to deals like the USMCA. Supporters criticized the court's decision as judicial overreach. They argue it undermines future presidential action to protect economic interests. The ruling is seen as reopening the floodgates to cheap imports. Critics hail the court's decision as a victory for economic sanity. They argue tariffs were a tax on citizens, stifling growth and causing inflation. Retaliatory tariffs harmed key sectors like agriculture, leading to financial crises. The policy strained international relationships and isolated the U.S. Critics contend a multilateral approach would have been more effective. They challenged the national security justification as a pretext for protectionism. The court's decision reaffirms Congress's authority in trade regulation. It prevents the executive from inventing crises to bypass constitutional limits. Trump's reaction to the court's decision stunned the nation. He called for a boycott of companies benefiting from tariff removal. This unprecedented move weaponized his base against major U.S. corporations. Legal scholars debated the implications of such an attack on the economy. The business community expressed shock and dismay at the call to action. Trump's response transformed the tariff debate into a political crusade. The issue remains at the forefront, becoming a loyalty test for Americans. The administration plans to appeal, setting up a Supreme Court showdown. The case questions the limits of presidential power in trade and security. The government's lawyers argue for broad executive discretion in protection. Opponents emphasize Congress's constitutional role in regulating commerce. The outcome could redefine executive authority in economic policy. The court's decision will be closely watched worldwide. The ruling could either curtail or expand presidential power. The case highlights the ongoing debate over separation of powers. The ruling prompts reflection on America's economic identity. It doesn't return the U.S. to pre-2016 free trade but opens a new chapter. The debate has changed, with both parties reassessing trade policy. Congress may reclaim power, defining limits on presidential action. Internationally, the decision could repair strained relationships. The U.S. stands at a crossroads, needing a new trade policy. The challenge is to balance global trade with domestic protection. The court's decision clears the way for a national debate on the future. The path forward must address the concerns of American workers.